And it says we're live. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Grad Chat from PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school beyond academic research and that may be more difficult to talk about in our day-to-day. I'm your host, Faye Lynn, and I'm a PhD candidate in biochemistry at UCLA. If you like what you see here, check out the PhD Balance YouTube channel for more grad chats, and don't forget to subscribe for notifications about when we go live. So our topic today is choosing an advisor, and I'm excited to welcome our guest, Kyle Kabasares. Kyle is currently a PhD candidate in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of California, Irvine, where he studies supermassive black holes. In the first year of his PhD, Kyle decided to switch out of his PhD program and change subfields. And Kyle's search for a new PhD focus led him to interview multiple professors and graduate students in different areas of research at UCI. He's here today to talk about that journey. So welcome, Kyle. How are you today?
Hi, Faye. It's nice to meet you. And I'm doing quite well for it being the day after my second COVID shot. So
Woo!
I'm going to take that as a really good sign that I'm not feeling anything right now.
Woo! Yeah, exactly. I know it. I'm so excited to talk to you, and I am so pumped that you are excited to talk to me.
I'm very excited.
So, if we want to start by just giving you some space to say, can you tell us a little bit about what led you to switch PhD programs and what was that like?
Sure. So the first year I was in graduate school, I had applied to do a PhD in an area of physics that's sort of known as material science. So it was a combination of like physics, chemistry, a little bit of engineering, very hands-on, very applied kind of stuff. And that was very similar to what I did as an undergraduate at the University of California, Merced. So I sort of transitioned into graduate school thinking I would just sort of continue what I did as an undergraduate. And at some point in my first year, I sort of realized that I really wasn't passionate about that particular part of physics. Like I had gone into the PhD because it was sort of like a natural progression. Like, well, I did this in my undergrad for 2 years. I have some experience in it, and I might as well just continue it in graduate school. But when I got to graduate school, I noticed that the department at UC Irvine had a lot more to offer than my undergraduate program did. Like my undergraduate program is very new. UC Merced's only 15, 16 years old this year. So their physics department isn't quite as expanded yet in comparison to like UC Irvine. And so, I did the research I did at UC Merced because it was really the only available option for me at the time. But then coming to UC Irvine, it was like, wow, here are all these really interesting topics in physics that I have always thought about, but I never had the opportunity to study. And now I'm really questioning whether or not I'm here for the right reason. And then in combination with that feeling, I was like the only person in my year, in my cohort, who was specializing in that thing. And I ended up getting like having separate classes for most of our classes our first quarter. I had like my own separate office from most of the first years who were usually like all together in one big office space. So it was a little bit isolating and a little bit like I don't really feel like I belong in this program. And if I really want to continue here at UC Irvine, I'm going to have to find something that I can commit to 5 plus 6, 5 to 6 years of my life to. So that's essentially what led me to want to change.
Yeah, I think that speaks a lot to how grad school can be a journey where, as you were saying, you enter this program, see that there's a wide range of different areas to pursue, and that's eye-opening. And I think that it's I relate to that as well because I feel like I'm in biochemistry. I applied to biochemistry because my undergrad research was, in protein structure, but then now I'm doing completely different. I study like immune response, right? Type of thing where as an undergrad, I do think you kind of scratch the surface on what it means to do research. So I think it's important to talk about that a bit more about how it's very natural to look for different things and realize that, maybe my passion for my PhD can be elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that when we first go to graduate school, I mean, I don't know, I can't really speak for anyone else except for myself, but when I came to graduate school, like I hadn't really put too much thought into like the research end of things because I knew my first year, and my second year would be mostly taking classes. So I hadn't really thought about it too much. But I think realizing that there were, other options for me and finding those options very attractive and very like, wow, like this person seems awesome. I know absolutely nothing about what they do, but like I would want to learn that. And the people who are here that, I wanted to work with, we don't necessarily maybe share the same vision of what my future is going to be like here, what my day-to-day activities are going to be like here. And I think um, I think it's really important, especially if you come to graduate school, maybe not 100% sure what you're going to do, that you start, it's better to start early asking these questions as opposed to doing it a little bit later.
Yeah. And I think with that, we had people submit questions from social media. And one question we got was, did your graduate program support you during the switch? Were people supportive in general?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, they were very supportive. The department chair at the time, actually, it wasn't the chair, it was the vice chair who I had to talk to, but the vice chair at the time uh, sort of met with me because I had told him, hey, like I came in here under this program to do sort of material science stuff, but now I'm having doubts and I think I really want to switch into, astrophysics instead. And he was very supportive. He just wanted to know, like, okay, so you want to do this? That's fine. You want to switch? Do you have someone in mind that you want to work with? Do you have a plan as to, what courses you're going to take if you're going to make this switch? And overall, in terms of like logistics, it was fairly easy in terms of just telling someone, hey, I want to change this. Can this just get put on my transcript or whatever? And there was some discussion because I had to take a certain test that I wouldn't have had to take if I was in my original program, but I had to end up taking it because I switched. And so that put me at a little bit of a disadvantage because I missed some classes just by virtue of not having switched to astrophysics as early. But in the end, I passed the test. It all worked out. So in terms of the department's like logistical side of things, they were very supportive, and it was easy to to express that to them.
Yeah, that's great. I think a lot of the times the obstacles that come in the way for people considering this route is what bureaucratically does it look like? Is it going to impact graduation time? Questions like that. So it's pretty cool that your grad program was supportive, and it sounded like you there were some bureaucratic things as far as like, did you say finishing your exams or just
Yeah,
being
so
timeline?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was just more of taking an exam. I hadn't taken like a certain class, so the exams that they were going to test us on were based on like these certain classes that we had assumed that they had assumed that we had taken, and I hadn't taken some of them, and I still had to take the exam even though I hadn't taken the class, which was not fun. But I essentially got them to agree that if I passed the test, I wouldn't have to take the class in the future because that the whole point of the test was to make sure you know what the class was about. So it worked out. I do want to say one thing though. I think one major obstacle that I faced was just from my own like perception of how I thought people would perceive my decision. Like I remember feeling like, oh wow, like this program, they took me in, they looked at my application, they said I was a good applicant. The head of the program was is very nice, and I really appreciated them taking the time to talk to me, and I had to like let them know that, hey, I'm not going to stay in the program. I think I'm going to pursue something else. And I think I was just kind of worried of like how will others perceive my choice, and it's going to make me look like I'm lost. I have no idea what I'm doing. I guess which was true at the time, but still, it was kind of terrifying to think of what other people might think. But it was surprising because when I did tell these people who I was worried how they would respond, they also were very generally supportive. And they were like, that's great that you found, what you want to do. And, by all means, leave the program and do this instead. So I think that was very eye opening.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's a if you want to see one of the themes of academia, there's this culture of like I have to be passionate about this like one project
Right.
that I'm studying, or else I'm like a bad scientist. Or these very it is this type of culture where I that's something to talk about. Like, what is it? How are you perceived when you want to pivot to a different type of project. And I think it's awesome to hear that there are people who champion you and ultimately want to support you in your goals and interests. And I think that resonates with a lot of people, that feeling you just described of, I think especially in academia, it's just so ingrained that when you enter a PhD, you have to show this intense interest to one thing, when in reality, it's also completely normal and natural part of your journey to explore.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I would also add to that that if you look at any sort of professional academics history in terms of what they've studied over the years, you'll see a lot of changes and variation over the course of, like, a tenured professor, right? Like my professor who I work for now, he doesn't necessarily uh, do the same exact thing he did his PhD thesis on. He's, adapted, he's changed topics a few times. He's still a very, very good person, what he did as a PhD student, but he's since expanded, his horizons.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's super important to keep in mind, that like I think in the moment it's easy to wonder, will I be perceived if I like change my topic as far as like passion goes. But that's a great thing to keep in mind. If you look at some of the journeys of a lot of other scientists, it's a very normal thing to switch around and find what you're passionate about. And I think a follow-up question to that is, did potential advisors ask you about switching sub-disciplines?
So no, it was really all on me. I mean, I think there were professors that I interacted with that kind of helped me reach that decision, in the sense that we would just talk, and then I would sort of realize maybe either it's the work itself that I'm not that interested in, or maybe it's the person who is supervising this group that I'm not interested in working in. But really, no one approached me about that specifically. Oh, and now that I say that, I am realizing there actually was a case like this. And I can't believe I forgot it, because it was like the whole reason I switched, which just makes me feel bad now. But the thing was that there was a professor who he didn't like recruit me to work with him, for example, but he noticed that I did very well in his class. And the reason he reached out to me was because since I was in the other program, I didn't end up taking the next class that he taught where everyone else had went. And so he kind of wondered where I went. He's like, "Where did you go? Like, you did really well in my first class. Like, why aren't you in my class now?" And he's like, "Oh, you're in that program. Do you want to be in that program? I'd happily recommend you to any other professor in the department, because I saw you did very good in my class." And so that very much was like someone not actively recruiting me to work for them, but saying, "Hey, are you really happy where you are? Like, you have a lot of potential to do this. I'm here for you if you want it." And I think that definitely pushed me over the edge in terms of, I think I'm making the right decision to switch. Yeah.
Wow, awesome. Yeah, I think it's really exciting when you have these potential mentors who are able to either maybe seed certain ideas, ask you to self-reflect and say like what is the best for you. I think that's awesome to have mentors like that. And I think it also goes to show, like in grad school, at least for me coming in as a new student, it's hard to know exactly what I'm doing.
Agreed.
Right? Like, and then having someone in these roles to give me some idea of how to find my path is fantastic, and also speaks to how we need to emphasize more mentorship in grad school, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that then you could look at that story I just said in a different light, saying, if that didn't happen, where would I be? I don't know. And so, I think emphasizing good mentorship in grad school is very important, dude.
Yeah. And with that, we have a question in the chat that
Oh,
says, how did you find PIs that are doing research you're interested in and taking in grad students? I've been looking at labs of interest, and many of them don't clearly say if they're taking in students.
that's a good question. So I just straight up asked these people because I was at UC Irvine already, and I could set up an appointment with them and meet with them in their office. And you're right in the sense that not a lot of groups will advertise that information, that you really need to talk directly to the professor in charge, because no one else really knows what the carrying capacity of the group is other than the professor. And you can ask the other students. I mean, they might have a vague idea. I mean, someone asked me actually, for example, is your advisor taking in more students? And I honestly did not know if he was willing to take more students. So it really is best to just directly ask the professor, either through just asking directly in an email, or if you're already at the school, setting up an appointment meeting with them, or just emailing as well.
Yeah, I think that speaks to a lot of like the unspoken culture of grad school in general, where these things aren't advertised and it is a lot of, just cold emailing.
Yeah, lots of
kind
cold
of.
emails.
Yeah. And I think if it wasn't for me talking to other students as well about like even setting up rotations, if your program does rotations, how at least our programs at UCLA, a lot of them set them up is just by cold emailing, asking, are you accepting students? And that I felt like was something that was just you're supposed to know. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I found out just by talking to people, being like, not even having explicit instructions or like, is there a portal? I don't know. But it's a lot of like these unspoken rules.
Right.
So let's see. I think people are interested in logistically how you switched. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the questions we have here says, what did you find was the best way to get in touch with professors that were potential advisors? So we talked about cold emailing, but anything else you want to add about how did you find potential advisors?
I will say that part of that was UCI's just system, in the sense that we have this thing in the Department of Physics and Astronomy where every Friday in the first year, professors will come and give talks about their work. And so throughout my first year, I had seen a lot of different professors who would just come and give a talk. And I thought, maybe they're very interesting. And because I was in another program, they had done the same sort of thing, but during the summer. So I had gotten to see a lot of presentations over the first year in graduate school of different faculty, and so I just knew who people were just from that. So I guess that's on UCI's good planning. Other things are just going on department websites. I mean, I kind of bash on department websites because professors sometimes don't update their websites in legit decades. Like you could probably find professors who haven't updated their website before some of their students were even born, which is hilarious to me. But looking at the research, and there were a lot of professors who, their research from 2005, 6 looked really interesting, but they hadn't had anything updated since. But I would just go off of that and be like, okay, I'm going to assume they're still doing this. If not, I'll find out at the meeting itself. But that's also another sign you could use, another metric perhaps you could use to determine whether or not this is someone you want to work with. I don't want to judge every professor who doesn't update their website, but I will say that there was not a insignificant correlation with website updatedness and the people I wanted to work with.
Yeah, I think that's another good point. A lot of the information we get is from the department websites. I think even applying to grad school, that was how I decided what places to apply to, by looking at the research that they had online, and it is limited, and I think other things people are interested in are what kind of questions did you ask these professors once you met up with them, to see what kind of advisor they'd be, to get a glimpse, beyond their online lack of online website.
Sure. I actually have two of these like papers that I use to interview these professors. So I actually have them right here, but some of them some of them are very like UCI specific, so I won't like go into those ones. But is it okay if I just maybe address the question? I kind of went through this to the story yesterday, but is it okay if I just briefly say what the question was and then maybe why I asked that?
Oh no, sorry, my headphone disconnected and
Oh,
oh no, I am back. Hello.
oh, hey, hi,
Woo, Zoom difficulties.
no problem.
Um, well, I didn't hear the last 20 seconds of what you said, but I think you had questions written down.
Yeah, so I did have questions written down. Do you want me to just say what those questions are and maybe not and expand upon them, or just say what the questions were?
Woo. You can do what works for you if you want to, yeah, share what the
Sure.
questions are.
I'll go really quickly. So this was on the PhD Balance story page I put, but I'll go through a little bit of them. So one of the questions I asked was, are you looking to take new students? I mean, that's just an obvious, is your group available to take me in? Because some professors will not advertise that information. The graduate students may not know. Only the professor really knows. So it's important to just get it straight from the person who's in charge of the group. So that was that one. Next question I asked was, how many students do you currently supervise? And that was just to give me an idea of, if they were a fairly busy professor, if they were trying to split time across, 6 grad students or something. I wanted to be sure I was working with somebody who could give me enough time to help develop me, especially because I was going from something that I knew in my first program and then switching into something I had no idea what I was going to do in the second for the switch. So it was like I need someone who can help me develop. Then I asked, how long do your former students typically take to graduate? And that was just to give me an idea. Do they follow a normal PhD progression, or are they somehow finishing in 3 or 4 years, or taking much longer, like 7 to 9 years, something like that. So I just want to get an idea of the kinds of students they've had. I asked a question regarding how are their students usually funded? Are they funded? Do they have fellowships? Do they have does the professor have grant money for them to just do research, or are they all TAing, as in the sense that maybe they don't have money to pay them? So get an idea of what their funding situation was like, and get a sense if they're the kind of professor who actively seeks that funding for their graduate students, because I think that's a very important factor. Next I asked was, what is the procedure to join your group? And I asked this because I've noticed when I was in my search, a lot of different groups have a lot of different rules and practices. Like some groups will make you give a presentation about what you did as an undergrad, and then they'll vote on whether or not you get into the group. Some groups require you to do like a short rotation period with them with a small project just to sort of test the waters out. Some groups just let you in if you ask, if they have room. So I just wanted to know, like, what should I expect? Another question was, how are the new students trained in your group? I wanted to know, is it usually the students teaching the students? Is it the professor teaching the students? Is it a postdoc? Who exactly am I going to be working with on the day-to-day? Especially when I'm starting out, because I'm very new at whatever I'm doing. And what else do I have here? I think the last one I think that I'll share is, what are your past graduate students doing now? So I thought one of the most enlightening parts of talking to these professors was wondering, where did their former PhD students, if they had any, where did they end up, and if they kept track with them? Because the professors that I ended up really liking were the ones who really knew where their past students were, and seemed like they had actively helped them get to where they wanted to go. And it also gave me an insight as to sort of get an idea, if I work with this person, what are some, possible exit careers for me after I'm done here? And does that line up with what I actually want to do? So I think that was a very insightful question.
That's awesome. I literally wrote in the chat, I was like, these questions are awesome. I'm going to take notes.
Well, thank you. They're also on the story from yesterday, if the story hasn't expired yet, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you hit upon so many of the important questions to ask when joining a lab, as far as like, what is their mentorship style? What is their funding situation, etc. Were there any red flags for you and answers that made you feel that this wasn't going to be the lab you wanted to work in?
Oh, there was a lot of red flags in a lot of different situations, but I'll share maybe 2 that stood out to me. And one was where I asked the professor like what their current students were working on and what their past students were doing. And it sounded like to me that the students, they didn't stay in academia. And it sounded like the reason they didn't was because they ended up having to learn a bunch of skills while they're in the PhD program that they never intended to learn, but I think they sort of did it, I don't know, as a way to, it sounded like as a way to escape the the program, as in finding a way to transition out of that career. And this professor I was talking to was a tenured professor. He'd been at UC Irvine for like 35 years. And I could tell just by talking to him and based on his funding situation that he hadn't really been active in research for 5, 10 years, really. He hadn't really been keeping up. And so that was a really major flag for me, knowing that his students kind of left or he wasn't really sure what they were up to anymore. And even his current student, he wasn't entirely sure where she was either. So I was like, that's kind of weird. Like, why don't you know where your current student is? Um, and another red flag wasn't really anything with the questions that were addressed, but I think this example really highlighted why I thought talking to the professors in person and actually getting to interact with them was the most like important factor for me, because this professor, I had done my research on them. I had read a few of their abstracts, and the research was very interesting. I also had met with one of their graduate students out before I met with them, and their graduate student gave this absolutely like A+ review of them. Like they loved this guy. They would take a bullet for this guy. This professor sounded like amazing to work for, right? But then I actually met with this professor, and I'll be honest, I couldn't even get one of my questions out because they just would just talk over me. They like were all over the place. Like they started bashing like other sciences because it was like they believe like, oh, my science is the most important science, and like we wouldn't have an energy crisis in the United States if everyone listened to what I said. And why are there people studying black holes and dark matter? Like that's useless stuff. So just based on that, it was like he looked really good on paper or on the website. His graduate student gave this absolutely like stellar review of him. So I came in with very, very high expectations, and he just completely failed my litmus test for, I couldn't see myself working for this person for 10 minutes, let alone 5 years. So that's why I still think like it's important to do those other things, obviously, like to look at the website, get additional feedback from their current students, even former students who used to be in their group as well. That's still very valuable insight, and I did a lot of that as well. But that's why I think I emphasized yesterday during my takeover that actually meeting these people, whether it be virtually or in person, I think was the most important factor for me, because I could just tell within 30 seconds to a minute whether or not this was going to work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it speaks to how everyone, if it's like needs as for what they're looking for in grad school, are different. Like, you mentioned this person had a great review from another grad student, but didn't seem like it was the best fit for what you were looking for. And I love how you're emphasizing it's important to meet with these people in person. And I think, yeah, it is limited what you see on the website. And ultimately, you're going to be working for a PhD program with this person for a number of years. And these people interactions are so important to keep in mind. And we got a question in the chat that I feel like your last story kind of captured a bit about this, but how were your expectations versus reality with the answers to those questions for the advisors?
Yeah. I would say for at least for the person that I ended up choosing to be my advisor, they were all answers that seemed reasonable, and they matched my expectations. I would say I think I probably met close to 15 different faculty at UC Irvine, and I'd say for maybe half of them, my expectations were not met, and for maybe like, so 15, that's like 7-ish. So then for maybe like 3 of them that they were like baseline, like, okay, that's like the bare minimum I'm gonna need to work with somebody. And then there was like one clear person who just like they aced my interview essentially. Like I'm interviewing them, so it was like I gave him an A+. So that was the case.
Nice. People are so different.
Yeah, people are so different.
Yeah, and I think themes of what I'm hearing from this is also like knowing yourself and knowing what you're looking for, because it's one thing to look on the website. They might meet your needs on the website. Talking to them in person might give a different vibe, and making your own decision about what is going to work with you with all this collective information. And we have another question in the chat that says, when you interview a PI, is it okay to ask them for other professors doing similar research?
Yeah, so I did that in some of my cases. Like some people were known to work with each, like some professors were known to have collaborators in the same department who worked with each other. And especially for the people who told me, no, I'm not taking students right now, I would ask, do you know anyone who is? And they would say, yeah, so and so is taking students right now. They do similar research to me. So that's totally a viable question to ask. I will say, with a caveat that unless you know like some weird department politics and people who just don't like each other, and you have some prior knowledge of that, maybe don't bring that up. I don't know.
Yeah, with these things, it's always small circles, networks, and that's also a dynamic when it comes to these things.
Right.
But it does sound like, in general, just getting to know who's out there, networking, asking people who they know in general is a important way to just see what's out there.
Agreed. Totally.
Yeah, and I think another question people are interested in is, we covered questions for the advisor, but what kind of questions did you ask grad students or current members of the lab about the lab that helped you decide what to do and where to switch to?
Right. That's also a very, very good aspect of this process. And for the students that I was able to get a hold of who worked or were currently working or currently worked for, or worked before, I should say, for the advisors, I asked them stuff like, I don't have a list, but I essentially asked them, what are they like in terms of being a mentor to you? Like, are they like overbearing? Do they have unreasonable deadlines? Do they understand when you just don't want to do research sometimes, like during the weekend or whatever? Or just sort of get an idea of like what their expectations were, and whether or not the graduate student seemed I guess just overall happy in the group. And so I'd also ask them about not just the advisor, but the other people in the group. Do you get along? Are there like group activities? Do you guys do anything as a group together? Outside of doing research? And I would take in those answers as well. And for a student I interviewed who was already a professor at the time, so I interviewed someone who was a student of someone I was interested in and got their PhD at Irvine. And I asked them, did this person help you become, a professor at an R1 university? And they're like, no, definitely. Like, this person, taught me how to write grants. They taught me how to like make good presentations. They taught me how to write, all that sort of stuff. So I would say definitely asking about expectations, the type of mentoring, are they kind of more hands-on or hands-off? Asking about whether the group seems to get along is important, and whether or not asking them whether or not they feel like they have free time outside of doing their own research. Those are the kinds of things I think I focused upon.
Yeah, I think it's super valuable to get perspectives from different people in the lab in addition to the advisor, because there's always those power dynamics, and different topics can be difficult to talk about
Sure.
depending who you're talking to. I think as someone in the mental health space, it can be especially challenging to talk about if it's work-life balance, or I mean, at the same time, those are still conversation points, I think, to hit upon with the advisor as well. But
Sure.
different people can give different insights. All right, cool. We are running out of time for this grad chat, but Kyle, if there's anything in addition that you want to hit upon that we haven't covered yet, anything you want to leave our audience with?
I think what I would say is, be very diligent and take this decision very seriously. I know that when applying to graduate school and going to graduate school and moving, or all the things that come with it, it can be very time consuming, obviously. And for me, it wasn't like I had a lot of time to just sit down and think about this decision, but it really is a big decision about in terms of how it will impact your career and whether or not you enjoy your graduate school experience. So I would say the earlier you get started on trying to figure this question out in terms of who you want to work for, the better. I had the fortune that I was able to do it fairly early in my first year of graduate school. But if I could go back in time and tell myself what I would do now, I would have definitely told myself, like, at the start of my senior year, that I really need to start doing this, or even sooner, maybe this summer of between my junior and my senior year during undergraduate, because it was a lot of work. And no one told me to do it. I just realized that this is a very big decision, and that I had to come up with my own sort of system of figuring out this question. And so I hope our discussion will help others make that decision as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that sums it up nicely, where this is such a valuable way to find your path, but also comes with some logistical things to take care of and how to navigate it that might be unspoken, and maybe there's not a set map on how to do it. And I
Sure.
definitely think people are benefiting from this conversation, as we've seen the engagement in the chat. Ooh.
Ooh, go chat.
So, yeah, and I even said, I think I said in the chat there, I think my past grad student self would have benefited so much from hearing these conversations. So for sure, this is super important, and it's great for grad students to connect about these things, which is the goal of PhD Balance. That's
Yay, PhD
awesome.
balance.
Woo! All right, and so this has been Grad Chat from PhD Balance. If this was the first time you're tuning in, we go live every Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to subscribe and you'll get notifications about when we go live. So until then, we will see you next time. Thanks again, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Faye.
All right. Bye, everyone. Ooh, okay.